Ave Maria in the Afternoon is a co-production of Ave Maria Radio and EWTN Radio and carried across the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. Welcome to Ave Maria in the Afternoon, examining the world through the lens of faith from the heart of the Church to help us navigate the culture. Here's Dr. Marcus Peter.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us on this hour of Ave Maria in the Afternoon. I'm Marcus Peter. We're opening by talking with my friend Dr. Gregory Popcak, and he and his bride Lisa co-host together More to Life, which is a daily EWTN and Ave Maria Radio call-in program that provides helpful advice and counsel from the lens of the theology of the body to help Catholic families thrive. They've also developed the Catholic Home app to that end. And I share this, the reason I have Greg on every week is because my bride and I have personally benefited tremendously from their friendship, but also from their teaching and counsel. And today, the reason why I mention all of that is because a recent study has found an increase in number of American Catholics leaving the church. Now, for many of us, that's not surprising, but to combat the issue, the study's authors suggested creating stronger community ties amongst Catholics, especially amongst children. Now, what's almost hilarious about that finding is that Greg and Lisa co-sponsored a study, I believe it was with the Cana Institute, some time ago. And even prior to that, they have been teaching this for a while now, that it really does boil down to the fact that in some ways it takes a village. But that village has to share that common religious vision of Christ at the center and the church, and the local parish community especially, having a kind of societal foothold that determines the ebbs and flows of local community life around the liturgical calendar. And so feasting and fasting, moral accountability, catechesis, all of these things don't happen in a vacuum. Your juridical canonical parish facilitates all of that. So Greg is going to join us to talk about how we can try to rebuild that at the home level with parents especially. We go on from there to talk about a particular issue I've been thinking about, the poisoned wells of desire. I want to talk about the sexual revolution, about pornography in general. A friend shared with me about how pornography has become a scourge in the lives of some men that he knows, and I want to address this. And I want to show how recent popes like John Paul II and Benedict XVI provided for us some doctrinal remedies. And then after that, we speak with my friend David Deavel about Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn, the Russian author, and his quest for true freedom. We talk about all of this after the headlines.
Thanks, Marcus. Good afternoon, everyone. This is your Ave Maria Radio News for Tuesday, August 19th. It's the Feast of St. John Eudes. Today's news brought to you by the Ave Maria Family of Funds at AveMariaFunds.com. The White House says Russian President Vladimir Putin has agreed to begin the next phase of the peace process. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said that includes a possible meeting between Putin and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky that could lead to a trilateral one with President Trump. Trump hosting Zelensky and several other European leaders at the White House Monday to discuss the war. Leavitt also reiterated Trump's assurance that he will not put American troops on the ground in Ukraine. Washington, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser is disputing President Trump's declaration that his crime crackdown is making the city safer.
This doesn't make sense. You know it doesn't make sense. The numbers on the ground in the district don't support 1,000 people from other states coming to Washington, D.C.
Trump called D.C.'s crime statistics fake in a Truth Social post, adding that the surge in federal agents and National Guard troops is already improving safety. There's a potential link between hearing aids and a reduction in dementia risk. According to a new research from the Framingham Heart Study, the nearly 3,000 adults studied who'd used hearing aids due to hearing loss cut their risk of dementia by more than half. Researchers say there's no benefit for adults who used hearing aids after the age of 70. Doctors say the study highlights the importance of early intervention and identification of hearing loss. Air Canada says the union representing over 10,000 striking flight attendants have reached an agreement, the union making a post on Facebook. A labor relations board has already declared the walkout by flight attendants illegal, but they defied a government order to return to work over the weekend and continue pressing for better pay and scheduling. From your AveMariaRadio.net news desk, I'm Steve Clark.
Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. A recent study has found an increase in the number of American Catholics that leave the church. And if the results of some of the studies my friend Dr. Gregory Popcak and his bride co-sponsored are to be held as true, many of them leave and don't come back. To combat the issue, however, this recent study suggests creating stronger community ties amongst Catholics, especially amongst children. And Greg joins us with more. Dr. Gregory Popcak, founder and director of CatholicCounselors.com. He and his bride, Lisa, have co-authored and authored over 20 books. They're the developers of the Catholic Home app. It's a resource for helping Catholic families thrive, and together they host More to Life. It's a wondrous program put out by Ave Maria Radio and EWTN. Greg, great to speak with you again. How are you?
I'm doing well, Marcus. Thanks for having me.
Always a joy, my friend. And I want to start by saying, when you saw the suggestion of the authors of the study, did you just want to do backflips in anger? Because you and Lisa have been saying exactly that for years now.
No, not anger at all. I think that this is in many ways a replication of the study that we did in 2023 through the Center for Applied Research in the Apostles at Georgetown. In fact, the new authors looked at exactly the same data set that we did from the Global Social Survey. Mm-hmm. That asks, which is it's sort of the gold standard for sociological research, and they ask a lot of questions about religious faith and life practices and those sorts of things. And so they analyzed the same data set and identified pretty much the same thing that we did, that 90% of cradle Catholics are leaving the church, which is a terrifying statistic. What the difference in what they did versus what we did was they proposed more theoretical responses to that crisis rooted in other research. Mm-hmm. We actually went a little bit deeper and interviewed families of the kids who stayed. So that 10% of cradle Catholics who did remain faithful Catholics, we interviewed both them and their parents to identify what was different in those families that enabled those families to successfully raise their kids to a faithful adulthood. And we actually looked at families who successfully raised all of their kids to a faithful adulthood. So they were pretty remarkable families when it comes to it. And it's fair to say there are no guarantees. There aren't any things that you can say, well, if you do these things, your child will absolutely become a faithful adult Catholic. But there are many things that parents can do to stack the deck in favor of that. And, and the authors of this present study focused more on parish life and lay movements and the importance of having your kids have other Catholic friends. And those things are all very true, and they're all very supported in the sociological research. But, the problem with that is that we don't have a lot of control over that. If we don't have a dynamic parish near us, if we don't have a chapter of a particular lay movement that is really welcoming to families, if we, for whatever reason, aren't able to be part of a large community, then it would appear superficially anyway that we're sunk. The research that we did through CARA 23 shows that the parents and the family as the first community really has the greatest impact on kids' faith transmission, because what we found was that if the faith is not the source of the warmth in the home, nothing else sticks, including community involvement, parish life, regular Mass attendance, Catholic education, youth ministry. None of it sticks if the kids are not experiencing the faith making a significant qualitative difference in the kind of relationships mom and dad and brothers and sisters are having in my family home.
Yeah, and there was one of the earliest wisdoms you and Lisa shared with me that almost completely informed the way we conduct ourselves as parents. It's something we knew implicitly, but to explicitly live that out. And so one of the things you also shared in all of our interviews is that it's those families that express that warmth in almost, quote-unquote, huggy manners, that children really start to understand that mommy and daddy's love of Christ is the reason for that.
That's right. Well, the Catechism even says that parents are the children's first experience of the love of God. The love that we have for our children should point back to the love that our Heavenly Father has for us. And part of that is exemplified in the affection that we share with our kids. We actually identified 12 habits that these families who successfully raised all their kids to a faithful adulthood practice in their households, and that extravagant affection is one of them. The respondents to our survey indicated that their families were much more affectionate than their friends' families, and that they used the word, as you said, huggy, many times in these interviews that we did. Other examples of things these families did was prioritize family time over other activities, and so kids be allowed to be involved in sports or extracurricular activities as long as they didn't infringe too much on the family's ability to have, for example, a family day or regular family meals. Or a family game night, or those kinds of things, because these parents understood that if we're going to form our children in the faith, we have to have time with them.
Right.
And by having our kids involved in 10,000 activities on a Wednesday night, and then 10,000 on every other night as well, we're surrendering our ability to influence our kids and disciple our children into a faithful adulthood, because they don't get to be around us seeing how Christians do the things that Christians do. So, so as we said, and in our original study, we found these 12 habits that families do. This study reinforces all of those things, but talks about community involvement and the importance of your kids having Catholic friends and all that, and that's important too. But I just really wanted to use this time to emphasize that even if you don't have that supportive community around you, there are things that you can directly control to increase the likelihood that your kids will really own the faith and love the Lord.
Right. And that's a crucial thing, that it is incumbent upon parents to lovingly hand forth that baton of the faith so firmly, so clearly, that children own it for themselves. They go on to carry that forward.
That's absolutely right. And so it has to become part of the daily life in my home, so I can see how this faith, makes a real difference in the way we organize our priorities, the way we relate to each other, the way we attend to each other. So for example, one of the other habits that we identified in our study was that these families really looked for little ways to make each other's day a little easier and more pleasant. They actively looked for ways to be a gift to each other.
Right.
And these were simple things. These weren't dramatic gestures. It was just, hey, can I get that for you? I'm going to the kitchen. Can I get you a drink? Good manners was another example of these kinds of things. There's just simple practices that we see as good things to do, but are actually the heart of family spirituality. And that's why we created the Catholic Home app, and that's spelled Catholic HOM, stands for Households on Mission. We created the Catholic Home app to teach families how to live out these 12 habits that our research found were responsible for successful faith transmission from one generation to the next. And we not only teach parents how to do this, we support them with parent coaching every day and tons of creative resources. In fact, Thursday evening we're having our monthly live Q&A where the whole Catholic home community comes together to ask questions and share success stories and just really support each other in building those loving, connected, and caring Catholic family lives.
Now, considering all of that, like you've mentioned, and like the author of the study mentions, community and developing community and being plugged into community is so crucial. So the Catholic HOM network, Catholic Home Network, is one wonderful way they can do that. You've also spoken about the need for local communities.
That's right, and that's one of the things we're also doing through Catholic Home. So we've created a resource for parishes to run monthly parent formation groups, where parents can come together and learn these basic habits and also support each other on the local level, in addition to getting the online support from the international Catholic home community. And those resources, by the way, are free to the parish and free to participants as well. We're happy to provide those to parishes because we really believe in getting this message out and creating communities of support that this most recent study is talking about, for helping families really live this out and support each other in doing that.
Well, Greg, always a joy to connect with you, and thank you for everything you're doing for Catholic families.
Always a pleasure, Marcus. Thank you so much.
My guest has been Dr. Gregory Popcak. He is the director and founder of CatholicCounselors.com, and we've been talking about, first of all, we're talking about the fact that one of the ways we can buck the trend of children leaving the faith is, for mother and father to be devoutly practicing, and for the faith to become the source of the warmth and charity within the home, and to hand it down firmly, clearly, and unabashedly, and to raise children to do the same, and also to develop communities. And so the Catholic HOM app is one way that we can do that. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter.
resetting your password, unsubscribing from emails, printing anything. Why are simple things sometimes so complicated? Thankfully, with an auto owner's insurance independent agent, getting the right coverage for your business doesn't have to be one of them, so you can get back to more important things, like learning how that printer works. That's simple human sense.
Call Choice Insurance Agency at 734-641-4200.
This program brought to you in part by Ave Maria, Florida, a big kind of small town where golf carts take you everywhere and there's always something fun around the corner. Discover championship golf, resort-style amenities, and a town center full of shopping and dining. With Ave Maria University and Ave Maria Catholic Church at its heart, it's a community full of connection and charm. More than 25 model homes are available for viewing. More information can be found at avemaria.com. That's avemaria.com.
Hi, I'm Dr. Marcus Peter, host of Ave Maria in the Afternoon and Unveiling the Covenants. Ave Maria Radio has been at the forefront of dialoguing faith at the intersection of all things pertaining to human flourishing. We need your help. Our infrastructure is in urgent need of updating. We want to ask you to support us in this summer campaign. Every gift, no matter how big or small, will be useful to bringing the gospel to the ends of the earth. Thank you. You are broadcasting hope with us.
Underwritten in part by the following nonprofit.
Are you paying high prices with a traditional health insurance company that pays for things that violate your conscience? There's an alternative available. Solidarity HealthShare is a community of faithful individuals and families that never share into immoral medical services, all while saving you money with prices starting as low as $85 per month for singles and $512 for families. Never fund another abortion with your healthcare dollars. Call 844-313-4999 to learn more.
Good afternoon, welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. If one were to diagnose the collapse of Western moral order in the 20th century, one would have to look not merely at the cultural symptoms, but also at the subterranean currents that fed them. So the poisoned wells of desire, as one can call them, that were first dug in the intellectual salons of Europe and the publishing houses of America and the academies of the West, that eventually flooded into bedrooms, classrooms, parish halls of ordinary men and women. So pornography's availability is one, the normalization of sexual indulgence without responsibility, the rise of a culture that mocked chastity while deifying desire. None of these arrived in a vacuum. All of these were the result of a long series of historical concessions and ideological assaults that ultimately declared war on the human person, the family, God himself. The great shift began in earnest when two particular events, you've got a series of others, but two particular events of the early 60s. First was the arrival of the contraceptive pill, and the second was the publication of Betty Friedan's The Feminine Mystique. When the FDA approved the pill in 1960, it was heralded by many as the dawn of a new liberation for women, supposed emancipation from the tyranny of fertility. The pill didn't simply alter medicine, it altered the biology of women to a degree, because with its arrival, modern man attempted to claim the power to sever the intrinsic bond between love and life, between union and procreation. Paul VI would later warn in Humanae Vitae that contraception would lead to conjugal infidelity and the general lowering of morality in culture and society, that men would lose respect for women, treating them as mere instruments of pleasure. His prophecies have proven true with uncanny accuracy. The Anglican Church had fallen in 1930's Lambeth Conference on this issue, and the moral repercussions for them and for virtually every Protestant denomination in the world have been nothing short of catastrophic. At the same time, Betty Friedan's book became a manifesto for second-wave feminism. She argued that women were trapped in a comfortable concentration camp of domesticity, and that true fulfillment lay in the embrace of careerism and self-assertion. So that's right, get out of the comfortable concentration camp of the home, where you can build a home and raise children in the image of God, no less, and get into the comfortable concentration camp of the industrial office. This critique did not arise in isolation. It was accompanied and amplified by the new glossy pages of Cosmopolitan magazine. This was under the leadership of a woman named Helen Gurley Brown in 1965. She baptized the creed of, she took Friedan's assertions and supercharged it. She baptized the creed of sexual experimentation, adultery, and consumerist indulgence as the new norm for women. So the Cosmo girl was held up as the new aspirational archetype, liberated, promiscuous, career-driven, utterly detached from the rootedness of covenant family life. And behind these movements lay deeper ideological currents. The neo-Marxist thinkers of the Frankfurt School, Herbert Marcuse, for example, insisted that the oppressive structures of Western society, like family, religion, traditional morality, these had to be dismantled to achieve true liberation. Marcuse's Eros and Civilization was particularly poisonous because it blended Marx and Freud into a cocktail of radical sexual liberation that called for the overthrow of bourgeois restraint, as they called it. So the family, which was once the bedrock of civilization, became recast as an agent of repression. Western heritage itself, with its Greco-Roman and Judeo-Christian foundations, was lampooned as patriarchal, oppressive, inherently unjust. By the 1970s, these critiques had entered university classrooms, dominating the humanities and eventually filtered into pop culture, music, film, television. These intellectual engines accelerated. The institutional church in the West was losing its once commanding hold in the public sphere. In earlier centuries, Christian teaching could shape laws, customs, public morality. By the mid-20th century, the church found itself sidelined. Secular government, elites, they mocked them, and the church was increasingly ignored by the faithful themselves. The Second World War had left Europe physically shattered and spiritually adrift. The horrors of Auschwitz and Hiroshima seemed to many as proof that Christian civilization had failed, and into this vacuum stepped a secular religiosity. It clothed itself in the garments of politics. For many, salvation was no longer to be found in the gospel of Christ, but in the ideologies of feminism, Marxism, or liberal democracy. The American public sphere witnessed Christians gradually ceding ground. Yes, Christians, we let this happen, often becoming more invested in political victories than in fidelity to Christ and his gospel, often interpreting Christ's teachings to suit our own whims. The secular Christian who voted with zeal but rarely prayed, who spoke with passion about party platforms but with embarrassment about the teachings of Christ, became an emblem of a faith reduced to civic religion. Alexis de Tocqueville once observed, America's greatness lay in her churches, where morality and liberty intertwined. By the late 20th century, many of those churches had lost their prophetic edge, content to bless the currents of the age rather than confront them. It's in this context that pornography, once confined to seedy backrooms and whispered rumors, exploded into widespread availability. The Supreme Court's 1973 Miller v. California decision redefined obscenity standards. It opened the floodgates for pornography, making it a matter of community standards. Into that, you have Hugh Hefner's Playboy empire. It transformed the sphere of the public view of sexuality. It glamorized pornography into a mainstream lifestyle. What had once been hidden became celebrated. What was once shameful as an addiction became a badge of supposed liberation. The sexual revolution achieved its triumph, the commodification of desire and of women. Into this darkness, however, stepped two prophets of radiant light, Karol Wojtyła and Joseph Ratzinger, later known as John Paul II and Benedict XVI, respectively. You and I probably don't even realize how blessed we were. Both men had seen firsthand the denigration of human dignity under totalitarian regimes, the Nazi occupation in Poland and the suffocating secularism of post-war Germany. Both discerned with clarity that the true battle was not merely political but theological. At stake was man's understanding of himself as a being created in the image of God and destined for covenant communion. So Wojtyła's theology of the body, it was not a marginal reflection, it was a systematic recovery of the biblical vision of man and woman. Across 129 Wednesday audiences from 79 to 84, John Paul II unfolded a theology that presented the human body not as an instrument of lust and pleasure, but as a sacrament of God's love, a visible sign of the invisible reality of divine communion. And against the reductionism of the sexual revolution, he taught, Man cannot fully find himself except through a sincere gift of himself to the other. Gaudium et Spes 24. Sexual union was not to be severed from procreation or fidelity. It was meant to image the inner life of the Trinity, a love that is free, total, faithful, and fruitful. Pornography's degradation of the body was thus a desecration of the very icon through which man is meant to image God. Ratzinger, for his part, taking lead from John Paul's leadership in that regard, advanced a biblical theology of covenant, which, by the way, John Paul borrowed from to some degree, that offered a sweeping remedy to the disease of secular religiosity. So in his works such as Introduction to Christianity, and later as Benedict XVI in Deus Caritas Est, he reminded the world Christianity is not an abstract philosophy, it's not an ethical code, it's a covenantal encounter with the living God, who is love himself. The covenant, renewed in Christ's blood, reorders human existence around worship, fidelity, communion, against the idolatries of politics, ideology, and consumerism. Benedict insisted that man's deepest hunger is not for autonomy, but for adoration. Together, these two great figures stood as brothers in arms, intellectual warriors who confronted the rising tide of dehumanization with the weapons of truth and beauty. They saw that the collapse of Western morality was not merely the result of bad laws or poor tastes in entertainment, but the logical fruit of abandoning God's design for human love and human society. Where the sexual revolution preached liberation, they proclaimed gift. Where pornography had taught men to consume women, they taught men to cherish them as icons of God's glory. In that light, my friends, the poison well of our desire may have flooded our civilization, but as living water, in the heritage of these two men, in the scriptures and the perennial teaching of the church that they upheld to their last breath, and all of this still flows from the side of Christ. This alone can cleanse, heal, and make all things new in our culture, society, and the West. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter.
Join Macomb County Right to Life for their annual Focus on Life benefit dinner. It's Tuesday, September 16th at the Mirage Banquet Center in Clinton Township. Hear a powerful testimony from Melissa Oden, abortion survivor and founder of the Abortion Survivors Network. The host is radio broadcaster Tom Jordan. VIP tickets are available with the dinner beginning at 6:45. Reserve your tickets today at nwmacombforlife.org. That's nwmacomb4life.org.
Another year has come and gone, and whether you like it or not, Uncle Sam requires you to make an accounting.
Perhaps it's time to call Myler & Zipka. They work with you to legally minimize your tax bill and identify ways to reduce future taxes. Eliminate the nagging feeling that you're paying more taxes than you need to. Call Ken Zipka today at 734-930-5500. Myler & Zipka. Integrity, excellent value, and people dedicated to a long-term relationship. 734-930-5500.
Welcome to Advanced Dentistry Center family. This is Dr. Metti, and our team strives to treat you like family in a loving and compassionate way as we focus on serving you in a Christ-like manner. We do this by emphasizing prevention and general well-being for a lifetime. Our private practice is small, personal, state-of-the-art, and innovative, with the goal to educate and motivate our patients in improving their oral health. It is through a partnership with you that you will achieve the goals for your smile. Advanced Dentistry is serious about the level of care we provide, with attention to details and an exceptional level of care, skill, and judgment. We are thrilled for the opportunity to serve you.
Dr. Matty and the team invite you to visit them at advanceddentistrycenter.com or call them at 248-594-9592. That's 248-594-9592. AdvancedDentistryCenter.com.
One person doesn't like the Mona Lisa, the second person does. And the third person says, well, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. It's a popular saying, we know that. Remember, though, that beauty is an element of being. It describes what a thing is. And because it is an element of being, while we talk about beautiful paintings and buildings, we also talk about beautiful persons. We know that Grandma Kuzno is beautiful. We know that our children are beautiful. It even gives us joy to see the cleaning lady in the halls of school, because she, too, carries a radiance of beauty. And if someone were to contradict you, if someone were to say, your consideration of Grandma Kuzno's beauty is just your own subjective opinion, we would know that person is wrong. Because beauty is not in the eye of the beholder. It is in my grandmother. It is in my child. GuadalupeWorkers.org.
Honey, did you ever call Mighty Dog Roofing of Ann Arbor for that free roof inspection?
I knew I forgot something.
Roof leaks can cause mold buildup or even roof collapse. Protect your family today by calling local Catholics Dan and Mary Flanagan at Mighty Dog Roofing for a free inspection of your roof, siding, or windows. Mighty Dog Roofing, 734-224-4916. That's 734-224-4916.
Support for this Ave Maria radio program comes in part by the non-for-profit St. Anthony Services. Are you shopping for mortgage products, Catholic investing, Catholic health, real estate, or estate planning? StAnthonyServices.org can help you find a Catholic professional for these needs. They regularly connect faithful citizens with faith-based professionals that share our Christian values. More information at StAnthonyServices.org or 877-LIFE-US1.
Good afternoon, welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. One of my favorite Russian authors is Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn, and in this recently compiled book, We Have Ceased to See the Purpose, it's a compilation of the essential speeches of Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn. We get a glimpse of Solzhenitsyn's thought about truth, the human person, society, human flourishing, and the things that we ought not to take for granted. Joining me to talk about this is David Deavel, who is really no surprise to this program, senior contributor at the Imaginative Conservative, associate professor of theology at the University of St. Thomas in Houston. David, great to speak with you again. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on, Marcus.
Always a joy, my friend. Always a joy. And okay, so let's start with the biggest picture possible. Solzhenitsyn, unfortunately, is not as widely spoken about or read as I would like. And you and I are mutual lovers of his work. I want to begin by asking you to exhort all of our listeners as to why we ought to pick him up, what are the things he does so brilliantly, and where we could start.
I think one of the main reasons to read Solzhenitsyn, especially some of his great works of literary art, such as the Gulag Archipelago or some of his novels, is that he is a man who is in earnest about depicting the truth of our moral being and the connection of beauty to morality. And although he's not a theologian, I would say that he's one of the great Christian authors of the 20th century because of his ability to bring to bear the truth about the way in which God made the world and the presence of Christ, even in the darkest depths of 20th century totalitarianism, but also speak to those of us in the West who have a kind of freedom that we've frittered away, and to encourage us to actually take hold of what our life is and live it heroically in the way that God wants us to.
Could you also speak about, one thing I've noticed that he does so exceptionally well is his analysis of the human person, the human condition, those driving forces within us. You see that come out really in the Gulag Archipelago. Could you comment on the brilliant way he does that and why that's important for us to read and also to study?
I think what's genius about the way in which he depicts these things is, particularly in something like the Gulag Archipelago, where he is himself a character, we understand that he is depicting something that happens to everyone. And everybody knows his famous line about the dividing line between good and evil runs right down the middle of every human heart. That's not just a sort of a slogan for him, but it's a reality when he tells these stories about his own encounters with evil. In the chapter known as the Blue Caps, about those who are the investigators and who would bring you into one of these work camps, he makes the comment over and over again that it's kind of an amazing thing, and it's a gift that he himself didn't turn toward evil in quite the same way that these other people did. He's aware that we're all on a knife edge ourselves, and that there's a real drama to our lives. Are we going to turn to the direction that God wants us to bid, to that conscience that is within us, what St. John Henry Newman called the aboriginal vicar of Christ, or are we going to simply live a life in which we only go for this worldly comfort or this worldly success? What are we going to look to? And that is an existential question in those works in which he appears, because he's very clear that he's not quite sure how he made it out of falling into evil, and he knows that everybody needs to feel that way themselves.
I love that you mentioned that, because you read his writings and his speeches, and you come very quickly to the realization he is not touting personal virtue in anything. There's a lot to be said about how he lives it, but he doesn't pretend to be this paragon of virtue. But when he speaks, you get the sense that this is a man who has spent time thinking about truth and striving to live it as best he can.
Yeah. He as you say, this is, they always say that autobiographies, are places where you settle scores and paint yourself in a better light. But the autobiographical elements of both his nonfiction and his fiction are not that way at all. And instead, they're actually depictions of grace, of providence, and of, a kind of sheer mysterious quality by which, some people can come out of something and not actually sell their soul, and some do. And it's clearly God who is at the root of this. When he gets to giving speeches, particularly after he's been kicked out of the Soviet Union in the 1970s, he makes this clear over and over again. His very famous speech that he gave after winning the Templeton Award for Science and Human Rights, he makes it clear. He centers the entire speech around the question, what has happened to our world? And it's an old Russian proverb that men have forgotten God.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what is at the heart of all of these things.
And I find myself quoting that line from the Templeton speech quite a bit, and no less poignant are the lessons we learn from his Nobel lecture. He starts prescribing, or at least diagnosing, the issues that led to the widespread violence we see in Europe, and his prescription to it is literature. And on the surface, David, you got to admit that sounds a little absurd.
Yes. Yeah, well, I mean, he took seriously the role of the writer. A writer in the Russian tradition is not just someone who entertains or even instructs, but a writer in the Russian tradition, and Solzhenitsyn held to this, was a kind of prophet, one who's not predicting the future necessarily, although there is that aspect, right? He talks about Dostoevsky said that, godless world would take 100 million lives, which ended up being pretty accurate about the Soviet reality in the next century. But it's primarily about speaking the truth and speaking it from the perspective of, from God's point of view, gained knowledge through conscience, but also the great Christian tradition, which he re-embraced even in the midst of his own time in the Gulag.
And considering this, when you look at that speech that he gave in Munich, right, the orbital journey, one can almost get a sense of how he detached the interiority of his being from the horrors of the Gulag. He saw human existence as existing in spheres, and so it's almost as if you can join him in detaching from your immediate sphere into the grander scheme of the divine plan.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, he sees that these things happening out in the world, and he's not afraid to use the capital P progress.
Yep.
But unlike, sort of the modern world's usage of progress, capital P, as, this great thing that we must all get on the bandwagon with, he sees progress as a real challenge. It's wonderful that we have the ability to communicate the way we're doing right now and speaking to many people at once, even though we're far away. It's wonderful that we can travel at these amazing speeds. It's wonderful, all of the things that we can do. But all of that progress is not an automatic good for human beings,
right.
But instead it's a really complicated challenge to humans. Will they actually forget God in the midst of this progress? Or will they remember God and be able to use that progress in order to make things better and not to simply destroy themselves. He saw how the Soviet Union was basically an experiment in destroying yourself by forgetting God. And he didn't think that most of the rest of the world was doing any differently. We were just perhaps going the speed limit in doing so because we had the same problems. We had forgotten God. We had not accepted the challenge of progress, but instead had simply thought that, well, it's just an automatic good. And he, as you say, he wanted the reader to detach himself from that notion and say, hold on, where is this train going, right? And that's the hardest thing for us to do because we get caught up in the stream. So,
my guest is Dr. David Deavel. He's a friend. He is a senior contributor at the Imaginative Conservative, an associate professor of theology at the University of St. Thomas in Houston. We're talking about Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn, precisely because of a book, We Have Ceased to See the Purpose, which David reviewed. And we're talking about Solzhenitsyn's wisdom, what we can learn from him for our life today. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter.
Looking for a trusted contractor for your exterior home improvements? Call locally owned Mighty Dog Roofing today for a quote on roofing, gutters, siding, or windows. Mighty Dog Roofing uses premium products including Owens Corning shingles and James Hardy fiber cement siding, and they offer one of the best warranties in the industry through their OC Platinum Preferred status. Visit MightyDogRoofing.com today or call 833-MIGHTY-4. That's 833-MIGHTY-4.
No one should ever have to choose between feeding their family and keeping their heat on. Impossible questions like rent or diapers demand answers every day, likely in your very own neighborhood. But you can help. Hope Clinic partners with you to provide free medical, dental, food, and behavioral health care, all in Jesus' name. While others face impossible choices, your choice is an easy one. Partner with Hope Clinic today. Find out how at www.thehopeclinic.org.
St. Therese once told her sister Celine that when we trust ourselves and not God, our soul becomes barren and incapable of virtue. Her remedy? External works of charity. We all try to do it on our own sometimes without asking for God's help. At St. Paul Evangelization, we suggest sharing the gospel with someone who needs it. Check out streetevangelization.com to find a team near you where you can share the love of Jesus. If there isn't one in your area yet, perhaps God is calling you to start a team in your city. To learn more, visit streetevangelization.com.
When the need for senior care arises, home is where the heart is. Visiting Angels provides home care for mom or dad up to 24 hours per day, including personal care, meals, and light housework. You may select your professional caregiver with Visiting Angels. More information at visitingangels.com or at 877-374-LIVE. That's 877-374-LIVE. Visiting Angels, America's choice in senior home care.
Do you own popular index mutual funds or ETFs? If so, you're automatically own shares of companies that conflict with your moral beliefs. Ave Maria mutual funds are managed to conform to pro-life and pro-family values. Long-term investors can invest in the no-load Ave Maria mutual funds. The experienced professional portfolio managers make decisions based on investment fundamentals and pro-life values. You can learn more about Ave Maria mutual funds today at 866-AVE-MARIA or visit AveMariaFunds.com.
Hi, I'm Dr. Marcus Peter, host of Ave Maria in the Afternoon and Unveiling the Covenants. Ave Maria Radio has been at the forefront of dialoguing faith at the intersection of all things pertaining to human flourishing. We need your help. Our infrastructure is in urgent need of updating. We want to ask you to support us in this summer campaign. Every gift, no matter how big or small, will be useful to bringing the gospel to the ends of the earth. Thank you. You are broadcasting hope with us.
Ave Maria in the Afternoon is underwritten by the following nonprofit organization: Real Estate for Life. Buying or selling your home or business property? Real Estate for Life can connect you with one of 1,400 pro-life real estate agents around the world. When Real Estate for Life receives a referral fee, they donate 70% to Ave Maria Radio and Human Life International. More information at realestateforlife.org or 877-LIFE-US1. That's realestateforlife.org.
Ave Maria School of Law is the Roman Catholic law school in the United States. Consistently ranked in the Princeton Review as one of the best and most conservative law schools, as well as pre-law's most devout law school. Ave Maria School of Law provides a traditional legal education while emphasizing how the law intersects with the Catholic intellectual tradition and natural law philosophy. Ave Maria School of Law, unabashedly Catholic, consistently excellent. For more information, visit avemarialaw.edu.
Good afternoon, welcome back. I'm Marcus Peet. I'm talking with Dr. David Deavel, Senior Contributor at the Imaginative Conservative, Associate Professor of Theology at the University of St. Thomas in Houston. David, you do a lot by means of public theology by its proper definition. So you're not just someone who sees the work of the theologian as isolated to ivory towers. In that light, when you look at Solzhenitsyn and his work, and he's talking about these spheres, it's very much like Abraham Kuyper. Can you comment on Solzhenitsyn as a kind of public theologian of his age?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. I think a lot of people will blanch at the idea that Solzhenitsyn's a theologian at all, because he rarely speaks in those direct terms. Right. But I do think that in the places where he does speak very clearly, he is pointing to the most fundamental realities of God and conscience, and particularly providence as well. Mm-hmm. There is an understanding that this world is not simply a plaything of those who have power. It's not guided by a historical process by which the Soviet is going to determine. No, but this is actually a place where God is in control. And it's not simply a predestined journey, but instead it's a journey that God invites us to go along, to become either heroes or to simply cave in on ourselves. And I think it's at that level that he's most powerful.
Yep.
You won't find a lot of, technical theology in his work, particularly in his stories, but what you'll find are those fundamental realities that people discover the truth about conscience, about the law of God, and that they suddenly are made to turn towards God and away from themselves, away from mere survival, onto an existence in which they can thrive.
And this is a man who's doing all of this from the perspective of one who's lived through an ideologically driven atrocity, just a bloody massacre. He's clearly a student, or at least a avid reader of Dostoevsky, and he talks about how Dostoevsky predicted socialism would cost 100 million lives in Russia, and by the time Solzhenitsyn's alive, the number has superseded to 110 million. So he's coming at this from a real sense of sober urgency.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to describe it. He wants us to think hard about what we're doing and where we're going and where our ultimate allegiance lies. But he also wants us to be sober about it and make decisions that are based on truth and not immediately fly into some sort of, something unrealistic. And I think that's the power of all of his narrative and the power of the speeches that are collected in this new volume. We have ceased to see the purpose, that he is a serious man talking about serious things, but he wants you to think about them and to reflect on them and to see the beauty and see the source of the beauty, which is really not something just for our sort of jollies, our entertainment, but really is a message about truth. And I think that's what's powerful about all of his work.
Yeah. I've seen you write quite a bit on commenting on the great evils of our age that come out of progressivist ideologies, secular religiosity. In the speech, If One Doesn't Wish to Be Blind, Solzhenitsyn was nothing if not prophetic, and it almost makes you want. I actually firmly believe everyone in the West should at least read that speech and think about where we are and where we're going.
Yeah, that's the thing, is that he understands that, I guess to put it in one way, the greatest problem that we have is closing our eyes to the reality that's right in front of us. And that's what he sees. That's what he sees the West doing, is, taking a blind, some people would be very upset, but he was he was very much in favor of the U.S. being in Vietnam. And I know that's very controversial, but his whole point was that the U.S. needed to stand against the Soviet regime and communism for those people in the third world, that world that is neither in the Soviet camp nor in the American camp, but is being fought over. And he wanted us to intervene in those cases. It's not that he was a warmonger or something like that, but that he had a real vision for that, about where should we put our attention. And he was disappointed that so many people ignored the reality of the Soviet regime. And he would sometimes quote Lenin's famous line about how the capitalists will sell us the rope with which we hang them. And he said, these people don't see beyond their own immediate good, and that will be the end of them.
I'm really glad you mentioned that, and I don't want to venture into overt current political speculation, but one can't actually have a conversation about the common good without acknowledging that a completely isolationist worldview violates the preservation of a local and therefore international common good. Solzhenitsyn understood that.
That's right. Yeah, like I said, he didn't believe that America was the world's policeman and we had to go and solve every problem and right every wrong. But he certainly believed that in the Cold War, that there was certainly a duty for us to fight.
Right.
And he was very upset in a way, if some of your listeners are probably fans of Evelyn Waugh in his famous trilogy with Guy Crouchback, Waugh depicts his own disturbance at the way in which the Allies, turned to the Soviets and then abandoned the entire East. That feeling, that judgment was shared by Solzhenitsyn as well.
Yeah, I agree. And considering that abandonment and how that impacted the eventual progress of the war, Solzhenitsyn looks back now and he realizes that, especially here in the United States, we don't have a real sense of what freedom entails and its responsibility thereof.
That's right. His critique of the sort of Western understanding of freedom was that it was a very negative and small sort of thing that was mainly aimed at being able to do whatever I want. But in the great Western and Christian tradition, he saw freedom as the capacity to do what you ought to do, to actually, as I've mentioned this term before, to become heroic. Right? We have freedom in order to act for the good in ways that are self-sacrificial. And he saw one of the main principles that he saw was self-limitation. That in personal affairs as well as in national affairs, any kind of affairs, self-limitation is one of the keys.
Right.
You need to be able to know what your sphere of action is, what you are called to do, and not go beyond that. Also, not to shrink back from doing your duty. As he certainly thought that the U.S. should do in Vietnam, but he also thought that self-limitation was a key. In that, I think he was deeply influenced by G.K. Chesterton as well, who also saw that limits are what allow us to be moral and allow us to be most fully human and creaturely.
He does that brilliantly in his Harvard address. He really takes anyone listening, really, but even those in Harvard leadership, to task. And when you consider that and his critique on the media and the media's responsibility in being stewards and heralds of objective truth that actually brings about human flourishing, just comment on that in light of how we see the media proliferate controversy today.
Yeah, it's interesting that a lot of people say, today people have gotten so cynical about the media, but Solzhenitsyn had that cynicism 50 years ago because he saw exactly how Western media behaved, and he thought that many of them were no better than Pravda, the Soviet paper that was named Truth, but of course really just told the party line. And so he was very much aware of this, that these forces were sort of controlling things behind the scenes, and all of these brave journalists just sort of they knelt to the narrative, even if they weren't Soviet publications. They often were too afraid to say something that would upset the powers that be. And he thought, if you're going to have this so-called freedom of speech, it exists in order to be heroic and to speak the truth. And yet, journalists have not covered themselves in glory from the time of Lenin and Stalin until now. Even Western journalists have covered up the atrocities that were committed abroad, and covered up, the bad things that are going on here.
Right. And to round off all of this, then I guess we see the most transcendental of his wisdom coming out in the Templeton lecture. So man has forgotten God, and he shows us very briefly how the worst atrocities committed are the result of what Nietzsche warned us about, that we killed God.
Mm-hmm. For him, that really was the problem, is that once you get rid of God, everything it really is permitted. Mm-hmm. That is ultimately the logic of atheism. And yet we have that testimonial within us, within our conscience, that justice, right, as he says in his great novel In the First Circle, right, justice, one of the characters says, justice ought to be written in letters 10 feet tall, mm-hmm. right, because once you realize that this world has a pattern to it and a purpose to it and a set of rules, then all of a sudden you see that this is a world of meaning. And although there's a great deal of injustice that flies against that justice, you understand that there's something right at the back of it.
Right.
And you start to perceive that God's actually speaking to you in that conscience, bidding you to actually listen to him.
David, always a joy to connect with you. Thank you very much for making the time.
Oh, thank you for having me, Marcus.
My guest has been David Deavel, Senior Contributor at the Imaginative Conservative, Associate Professor of Theology at the University of St. Thomas in Houston. Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn is an underrated author in modernity, and I humbly encourage all of you to pick up a copy of his writings, including this one, We Have Ceased to See the Purpose. Thank you for joining us. I'm Marcus Peter.